Step right up, folks! Your dream come true! Give a wedgie just 25 cents!
Wedgie?
The Wedgie Club. 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 When most of us think of wedgies, we usually think of the schoolyard prank, or maybe even fortunate enough to receive at some point in our lifetime. Since the beginning of time, wedgies have always happened thanks to the invention of pants and more so underwear. Have you ever wondered what was the actual origin of wedgies? When was the actual first wedgie that was given on record? When did it become popularized? And more importantly for many of us, why do we like wearing our tidy whities on our heads so much? For generations, tidy whities and other fabrics have been stretched to unimaginable heights. However, when many people think about when the first wedgie is given, they usually like to think of like the 1980s, or the 60s, or maybe even as early as the 1920s. However, in this video, we're going to do a deep dive on the entire history of wedgies. When did it actually really start? This is the evolution of wedgies. Welcome all that are wedgie lovers and non-wedgie lovers to the Wedgie Club channel. My name is Jahk, and I'll be your lovely host during the 6-part series on our favorite pastime, the evolution of wedgies. Here's where we will lift the veil, in underwear of course, into our most diabolical wedgie content, where we will discuss iconic wedgie moments in history, pop culture, our community, true crime, and so much more. So put on your favorite pair of undies, let us know what brand you're wearing, and sit back and enjoy the show as we've enjoyed making it for you. The year was 5000 BC, and the wedgies were quite plentiful. During my day, warriors would go out and fight for their country, fight for the valor of their family, and fight for their honor. Meanwhile, those lowly gatherers would pester around, trying to find nuts and berries so that maybe they could feast too. These were the old school jocks and nerds of my day. However, unlike you present day humans, back then we didn't have many choices of underwear. We didn't have those newly Speedo wearing ones, as they call them, and you know, the long fitting longer shorts that you all wear under your pants. Then we had something was known as the loincloth, and the loincloth especially was worn by the warriors because they needed something that was light and able for them to be able to move freely. And you see, this was in many different cultures, not just mine, but in Egyptian culture, and Native American culture, and Indian culture, and then one of my favorite ones, the Japanese. One of the greatest warriors of my time, some of the samurai gentlemen. I love them all. We should probably bring some of them to come to the Colosseum for good old Caesar. Now, what was interesting about their loincloth was that they had many different styles. They had some that cover the front, they had some that had different styles of it. But what was most interesting about this was there was one in particular that had a string that go up in between the cheeks. This is what we call the fundoshi. And the fundoshi, by record, was the world's first wedgie. The fact that the first wedgie started out as a thong is really interesting because it really speaks to the evolution of masculinity. I mean, people today, my grandson told me, it's like the Andrew Tates and the Fresh and Fist and all these other red-pilled people. You know, they speak about masculinity as if we weren't wearing skimpy undies since the beginning of time. I mean, look at Wedgie Kisses loincloth. We made this one for him with our hands. Now, over time, you know, we stopped wearing loincloths and we wore different things, but in Japanese culture, the fundoshi continued to be one of the greatest staples of Japanese male underwear and continued to be one of the best things until about World War II era, when bridge started to become a trend. So young wedgie serves, if you are watching this, if you want to wear panties or you want to wear anything that you choose to wear, wear it with pride. That's what makes you a man. Now, will you continue listening to Wed Jesus, or do you want to listen guy on the internet that my grandson told me I have to say this, I can't remember how you say. They don't have holes Hope I said that right. Don't worry, you wedgie serves. We will get to your version of your new day wedgie as we continue on through time. Keep watching this video on, as you say, the Wedgie Club, and you know, you may too have holes someday. Not really. Now, I know that most of you may see that title and think this was a great time, but please remember, this was the 1930s. This was during the Great Depression and also the coming on of World War II. Many people did not have jobs, could not feed their families, went poor, even went homeless and had to move into places known as Hoover towns, and life just became rough for the average American in other parts of the world. As you can quite assume, life was pretty hard for people during the 1930s, so who really had time for wedgies? A young Italian designer known as Salvatore Ferragamo created a 2-inch heel shoe known as the wedge, or in some people call it the wedgie, though Elsa Schiaparelli would be the first one to actually get the credit for the term wedgie in 1938. It's quite interesting. Now I'm sure you're wondering, oh my God, jahk, why are you giving us this information if it's not what we're looking for? Well, here's the thing. This term is known as the first occurrence, where the term wedgie would not be used in the way that most people think about it today. When you tell random people when they hear the word wedge, they think about potato wedges, fruit wedges, the block that people used to put under their door to keep the school doors opened, fashion. There's so many other things that wedgies could be. This would be the first time in history that wedgies will be seen in many different forms. Just not the one that we're used to, but don't worry, we'll get to that in the next decade. But this does not mean that wedgies did not happen during this time. Please keep in mind that there was no term for it by this point, which means there were probably lack of reports being made on it, especially because bullying would not become a big issue that lobbyists and people in governments would like to tackle until 1990s. More about that as we get to the 90s. Wedgies were not the big priority on the top of the list, and then keep in mind, many families are poor, so who's really caring about little Jimmy or little Elsa getting bullied in school and possibly getting wedgied? People don't have jobs, you getting wedgie tortured. Now, though it was the Great Depression, in 1935, Coopers Incorporated, now known as Jockey, created their first pair of the world's tidy whities and quickly sold out of their stock, so much to the point that for almost half of a century, they ruled the underwear market, and many people couldn't get their hands off of trying to wear a pair of briefs. And as many of you young cats know, we all know that tidy whities are the #1 choice to rip people's underwear with. And given that their design is very similar to panties or women's underwear, it should not be a surprise that while some men were very comfortable with it and cool with seeing them, there were other men who wanted to make fun of you and also bully you for wearing them. Again, I do think that wedgies were happening. It's just unfortunate that there was a lot of undocumentation that went past due to the effects of Great Depression and the future of World War II. The lack of documentation also gets furthered when you look into other minority places like African Americans and Latino communities. If they weren't documented in many Caucasian areas, they definitely were not documented in those more poorer and more colored towns due to the Jim Crow laws and racism. Racism can also affect access, as many people may not be able to even get the Cooper Incorporated tidy whities if it's not sold in the correct neighborhood. Because of segregation laws and Jim Crow laws, many people are not allowed to shop in certain stores in certain neighborhoods, which means that they did not have the same access as other people. All of this was happening as World War II was on the horizon like an atomic wedgie. What you looking at, nerd? Wanna get a wedgie? The 1950s. The era, for some reason, many theater kids that I went to school with wants to go back for some reason. Welcome to the era of the baby boom, where we have the biggest generation until millennials in 2019. Similar to the coded sky-high wedgie, which we will discuss when we get to the next era. America was living high off of the success of World War II, and us coming home is the victory. And with that came the new generation known as the baby boom era. Here was the emergence of rock and roll, teen movies. Dorothy Dandridge and Marilyn Monroe, two of the most beautiful women I've ever seen, became the forefront of America's emerging new generation of teenagers. Due to the many children being born during the baby boom era as a result of the end of World War II and many soldiers coming back home, as well as the integration of black students into white schools as a result of the 1955 Brown versus Board of Education, there should be no surprise that school populations grew to unimaginable amounts, meaning that there was a lot of overcrowding in these schools and neighborhoods. So what happens when you have a lot of people in one area? You're gonna want people that wants to feel like that they're better than other people, or in other words, you like to call that classism. Though there were always rich and poor people that were around, there was now this need to define who was rich and who was poor, and who was black and who was white, able and disabled. And this of course plays a role into the future comings of bully and nerd culture. And because you had this social ladder that was happening in school, a lot of kids ended up getting bullied, and in some cases even getting wedgie. During this time, bullying was also seen as a thing where kids will fight back, even though they would also get just as much as trouble for fighting back to somebody who has been tormenting them for X amount of time or years. This goes back again to like there was a lot of bullying reports were not discussed or reported, especially because bullying was just different back then. Keep in mind, underwear has also grown exponentially by this point. So more people have access to now underwear. Jobs have came back. The US is starting to have an economic boom. More people are able to afford more things versus the latter time in the Great Depression. One Edison noting that his father ended up getting a wedgie from somebody during his time in the Navy. I'm assuming somebody that was either in his crew or maybe a higher ranking official. While this could possibly be a power dynamic, what this really shows is the horseplay side to wedgies. Another netizen did note that there were a few kids that got wedgies in school. It wasn't as bad as what we'll probably see as we venture into the 70s and 80s. I do want to note that these two sources are not peer reviewed, so you do have to take them with a grain of salt given that they're not verified. Or what this does speak to is the possibility that this era was not missing any wedgies. It just wasn't documented. The Navy story also speaks to the first time where you see adults partaking into something that's pretty juvenile. Like wedgies is more so something that happens between usually kids, which is why a lot of people don't even think of it as a fetish. The fact that we're seeing adults partake into this. Guys in the Navy, of all things, like what we're called the Navy.
Squidward, they're running the Navy!
While the 50s did not have a lot of data for us, what it does show is that there is now starting to be a certain foundation that's getting laid down. The term wedgie, the way that we know it, will not be coined until the 1970s, where the Grundies were in groove. Alright, this is jahk back in character because I ain't got no 1970s accent. The decade was the 1970s, you jive turkey. Now don't be square, young player. This is the era of Grundies In Groove. We got disco music at its height. Studio 54. The coolest underwear you ever gonna see. And this will be the first time that we see our favorite pastime finally labeled in dictionaries. In 1978, Oxford finally coined wedgies as a term as a schoolyard prank. Now remember when I stated earlier that wedgies were probably done and we just didn't have a word for them? The term wedgie had many different forms, from Grundies to Snuggies. Not only does that reflect just the popularization of the wedgies, it also reflects the culture of it becoming a thing. By this point, famous people even noted getting wedgies during their day. James Comey noted that back in the day, in the 1970s, he used to get wedgie by two guys in his school.
He slammed into a locker hurt, but I could handle it. More dangerous were the wedgies. If memory serves, a wedgie involved ripping another boy's underwear out of his pants by grabbing the rear waistband of his underwear and yanking upward. The offense typically involved two assailants, and I endured several in the 9th grade.
R&B singing sensation Johnny Gill's mother recounts when he went to school that he would always get dressed up in suits because he hated getting wedgied by the other kids. Now what further proves why us in the 1970s really had the popularization of wedgies title is because we were the first ones to get a TV show. In 1976, Kenny and Company graced televisions in many people's households with the first ever wedgie on an episode. Though this was the only reported incidence of wedgies in Hollywood, this also will lay the groundwork into what we will see in the next coming decade. In the future, further reports also speak to their time during the 1970s and wedgies becoming more of an absolute thing happening. The lack of concern for bullying also plays a role into why wedgies were now happening more than ever. People were still very, very lax. Even idea of people getting bullied because they saw it as something that will toughen up children, and if anything, it brings character. Children also having so much freedom during this time compared to the past and the future made it easier for other children to then bully children even outside of school and possibly also give them even more wedgies. Oh, and before y'all go to the next decade, I just need you to remember, we gave y'all disco. Welcome to my era, dweeb. I'm sure you've been waiting all night long to get your tidy whitey stretched by a guy like me. Welcome to the 1980s, dorks. We are the greatest era when it comes to fashion, We created MTV. We had some of your greatest pop stars from Michael Jackson, Prince, Whitney Houston. We had to take off the hip hop culture. My favorite guy, Deion Sanders. Bully and Nerd movies. Biggest part of this all that matters to us is this is when Wedgies have taken off to full-on mainstream levels. The 1980s was responsible for creating a lot of Gen X and early millennial crowd wedgie fetish and wedgie awakenings as a result of the many different pop culture events, TV, underwear styles, and more. Now what my cool, awesome bully self kind of realized during this decade is that there were other wedgies that were happening outside of just bully and nerds. It was happening in different areas like sports. In 1980, WWE was founded. It quickly took over airwaves as we go across the 1980s with big, strong, burly men like myself wrestling each other in a ring for everybody to watch on television and in person, along with the women. These men mostly would not wear anything but a pair of trunks, which happened to be like briefs. This was the first time that we've seen a wedgie in a sports field by two men that honestly are probably equal in ability. WWE is a show. They have to do what they have to do to make sure y'all get a good show. During these wrestling matches, what would usually happen is sometimes the victor, when he gets on top of the person, he'll usually pull up their trunks, in which give them a wedgie for national television and all the audience to see. This was also the first time that many men were able to see a woman get wedgie for the first time on national television, as the women wrestlers will also be receiving wedgie sometimes from their female counterparts. Sometimes they even mix wrestle, which allowed them to be able to have situations where girls would give a guy a wedgie or a guy could give a girl a wedgie. Given that this form of horseplay involves you exposing somebody's butt cheeks to the whole national television, and you got a whole bunch of little boys and little girls out there that's growing up watching this, of course they're going to somehow get influenced. Not only did this make up a love for wrestling both in a regular environment and in a kink environment, but it also gave rise to a lot of people's wedgie fetishes as well as briefs and underwear. As a matter of fact, there is someone who is still active to this day in the community that was actually influenced by this era, and I will get to them when we get later in the decade. But we cannot talk about the 80s without talking about the influence and effects of bully and nerd culture. Movies like Revenge of the Nerds, just one of the guys, and my favorite, Weird Science, held usually puny, nerdy characters at the forefront, usually receiving a humiliating wedgie by a bigger or older guy as a means to put him in his place. And keep in mind, these were not small little films, these were blockbusters. The rise of these movies confirmed that wedgies were continuing to grow in the mainstream era. Even other films like Star Wars made nerds feel like that it's okay to be a nerd and dork out about some big dudes fighting with lightsabers. In one way, they're telling dorks that it's okay to be a dork, but in another way, in movies like Weird Science and all the other ones I listed earlier, they're telling them, don't get ahead of yourself though, you're still a dork. All these movies really painted a picture for how nerds had to live their lives on a daily basis if they were given to the effects of bullying. These movies made them America's whipping boy, someone to make fun of in case you felt bad about yourself, or at least you saw that dork over there getting the tonic. This is why today's community is usually focused in, are you a bully or a nerd, instead of it being focused on, are you a giver or a receiver? Because media like this in the 80s made us all believe that nerds only can be one thing, just like feminine men can only be either gay or bottom, when they could probably be a multitude of other things. And this is why I sometimes criticize the idea of the terminology from bully and nerd and sub and dom, because it's so restrictive. It's very limiting even for the dorks that I sometimes give atomics to. I'm sure that these films also led to the influence of other men who may not even be into wedgies but love tormenting their little dorks, and so they probably ended up even getting more wedgies as a result because of these movies. Now let me just say, I'm not a dork sympathizer, okay? I don't really care about what the dorks got going on, but I do have to point out the truth. These experiences led to the change of the cultural attitudes of nerds feeling comfortable wearing things like tidy whities and briefs, and now switching to boxers and boxer briefs, which we'll see later on more as we go into the next decade. When Edison notes that back in the day, most men all wore briefs. That was just the times of what it was. So nobody cared who wore briefs. But then at a certain point, with the influence of television and growing up, masculine standards, those things changed. Now on the lighter note, we did get some non-esque bully nerd-ish type of wedgie content. In the movie Caddyshack 2, one of the reporters ended up giving one of the putters or golfers, whoever you call them, while he was attempting to hit a stroke, the man ended up getting a wedgie, giving him multiple yanks before finally stopping. And what's interesting about this is that this shows again that this schoolyard prank continues on well into adulthood. All of these things also speak to the cultural attitudes towards wedgies, because if you were the giver, nobody looked at you really crazy. If anything, they would laugh with you as long as you weren't the receiver, especially if you were wearing tidy whities. God bless them. The 80s was also during the time where you rarely ever seen anybody get revenge, especially when it came to wedgies. They may get revenge on their bullies, like in Revenge of the Nerds, but rarely do they ever get like the get back wedgie from the person that gave it to them. What also made this era iconic was that VCRs were becoming more and more affordable to most family homes. So a lot of people by this point did have a lot of VCRs in their homes. For those of us that may not be old enough to remember, the VCR was very integral to not just the wedgie community, but to the entire American public. This is where you could be able to record all of your videos from your favorite TV shows to whatever that you chose to record. You would be able to have that on your cassette tape for till it breaks. Another reason why the VCR was so integral is because unlike the future, much of the content of yesteryear was not that much. Yeah, they had a few movies here, maybe a few TV show showings there, but that was really it compared to when we get to the 90s and the 2000s. So not only was this becoming like the first place where people would have like what we consider today a Google Drive or a VCR tape full of just wedgie content being recorded, but this will also be the place where people could trade this video content. And in 1985, there was a young man who fell in love with seeing female wrestling wedgies after seeing one of them get wedgie. This event, of course, changed his life because that's when he realized he had a wedgie awakening and, more importantly, a wedgie kink now. And he wants to make sure that kink was being taken care of. So like I said with the VCR, he ended up using it to record some of the greatest wrestling wedgie videos that he could have gotten during that time in the 80s. Keep in mind again that there was not a lot of content during this time.
Just wanted to jump in right here and just give a little bit of context to what I was saying. While there was a lot of content on national television and mainstream media, content from the community, even if there was any, was pretty much non-existent during this time. This was the 80s, where the first cell phone made was like hundreds of thousands of dollars. The internet during this era was just getting started. By this point, much of the community was pretty much underground, and unless you knew them personally or found them from somewhere, you probably weren't going to be able to get in contact with them. So unless you saw wedgies in mainstream media or in real life, content was not that accessible until you got into the later decades.
And so in him understanding that, he ended up learning how to pay certain models to eventually do some form of wedgie content. But that young man's name is JR Productions. Now, as we get to the end of the 1980s, most of us bullies have grown up, went off to college, went into the NFL, became the big, strong jocks that we can. But if you thought that wedgies ended just because we've grown up, think again. The 1990s are when wedgies have officially gone wild. I know this all too well because I was born during this decade. 99, if you're alive, stand up. Unless you're a nerd, you're not really part of us. I don't know what that 80s dumb jock told y'all, but this was the best era for music, fashion sense, TV sitcoms, movie channels, underwear, and of course, as we're all here to talk about, wedgies. Now, I know you may think because you see the nice get up, that I might be one of the nerds, but let me tell you something. There's a beautiful thing called fashion. A lot of people seem to think that us jocks are dumb, but the reality is that's a weird way to spell dominating. During this decade, a lot of wedgies have happened in a lot of college dorm rooms. According to Sarvetnik, Rutgers University juniors would terrorize freshmen with their top choice of torments, which were, surprisingly, wedgies. During this period also, the first time we've heard in history the term Wedgie Master was coined as the leader of the group of the Wedgie Patrol. Can y'all just let it sink in that we had a Wedgie Patrol? Matter of fact, we had a Wedgie Master, a public Wedgie Master. Could you imagine being the school Wedgie Master? And this was a reflection of the past decades' influence in the media with nerd and bully culture. The blockbuster movies of Weird Science and Revenge of the Nerds. Many people have now know what wedgies are and are willing to use them and a part of their torment. This will be the first time on record that we would see wedgie culture as a result of the media, and also how it has affected the wedgie community. And due to the laxness on the situation, I really wonder if the term Wedgie Master was made by somebody who was not a part of the community, or someone who was DL and running silently amongst the community without nobody noticing. The media's continuous portrayal of nerds as being weak and easy to beat up and give wedgies to, also played a hand into why they also received more on their end, as well as why they stopped possibly wearing briefs. While hip-hop culture might have taken off during the 80s, the 80s was still pretty much a pretty fun era on a mainstream level. But then when you get into the 90s and now grunge is becoming a thing, hard rap is becoming a bigger thing. So that the cultural attitudes change towards little things like underwear. As a result of this, you did see more people starting to venture off into wearing more boxer briefs or even wearing boxers, or in most cases they probably would still wear their briefs but wear the boxers over them. Now if you were a nerd that were fortunate enough to outrun my grasp as the fellow wedgie master of my undergrad, you would still have to possibly deal with the fraternity culture that comes with being on a university level. According to Rose, in 1995, fraternity culture cited wedgies as a form of bonding among fellow men. This continues to echo the joking culture of wedgies, but also lack the realization of ostracization and the damages inflicted. This is interesting because up to this point, wedgies were seen as a negative behavior and a form of bullying, but for the first time in history, fraternity cited it as a form of bonding and as a form of a positive experience between brothers. But what it did not focus on was the damage it was inflicting on the other members. In other reports, some members recounted wedgies being used as a punishment as a means for a member who was suspected of being gay. With the fraternities that participated, the wedgies during this era was way worse. Most of the reports that I've seen included a ripping, devastating wedgie, and depending on what underwear you wore, if it was super tight, if it was boxers, that probably hurt. So while it is great to see that most fraternities who participate in this see this as some form of positive behavior, on the receiving end, it is still a very negative behavior to most people. Yeah, you may get some guys that are fine with it and probably laughing and can laugh it off, but in most cases, people can get injured, in some ways, even damaged. Another situation that speaks to the attitude among not only wedgie culture, but fraternity culture and just being masculine was the 1966 incident with the Kappa Alpha University. One report noted in 1996 that Kappa Alpha fraternity during initiation gave one of the pledges a ball-busting wedgie. Let me say it again. Ball-busting. During this interaction, he ended up losing it and had to go home for the semester. And as a result, the fraternity was on watch. Despite the rise of like wedgie incidents that are happening in higher education, there were no legislation or new rules put in place in order to like stop this or mitigate this. So this would continue on, honestly, until present. Fraternities also work a little bit different. Some of them are grandfathered in. Now, aside from fraternities ruining the family jewels with a piece of fabric, these types of wedgies, which we now know to be wedgies, will be seen more as we go into the next decades and full on. Now, what also made my decade so iconic was the incorporation of different types of wedgies within media. In 1991, you had Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey, which played a huge role with showing audiences the different types of wedgies that were given, like the Melvin. Which, can I just say, that discount Grim Reaper, he low-key deserved it. I mean, I ain't even watched the movie, but I'm just a Grim fan from Grim. In 1995, after the success of the 1992 movie, The Mask animated series was born. For those of you that's not familiar with The Mask, he was the millennials' Wedgiesaurus. This maniac began a wave of atomic wedgie massacres throughout his town, neighborhood, and the whole universe. This unlocked a whole new technique for many people who were either into wedgies or just bullies or people in general. What was interesting about this show also was The Mask didn't just target just people. He targeted animals. He targeted buildings. He targeted God if he could. Like, no one was safe. No one's underwear was safe around The Mask. Like, The Mask was such a menace that he literally had the lead detective of the city having to buy new underwear each week, sometimes even each day. That show alone unlocked a whole bunch of new wedgie fetishes within the millennial demographic as well as Gen X. In 1997, Casper's Spirited Beginnings also gave us one of the most iconic wedgies in history, with the crossing guard receiving an atomic from a ghost, as well as showing most of us our first ever hanging wedgie. In 1998, Disney released Safety Patrol, which showcased a bunch of bullies trying a whole different bunch of types of wedgies on these two nerds, from all-around wedgie to the hanging wedgie. In 1999, Punks gave us the most exaggerated atomic wedgie that people have seen, where it goes completely over into the neck area. Side note, I do wonder though, do you think that some of these executives probably had a wedgie fetish? Because think about it, some of them will pick up where the other person left off. This person will find out how to do an atomic, and this one will know how to do an atomic better. That was just a thought. Let me know what y'all think in the comments. What this decade does speak to is the amount of change that's happened between not just the wedgie culture, but also individuals who are getting wedgied. More TV shows are incorporating wedgies into their slapstick culture. Even shows that are like on black television, like In Living Color, and the Wayans brother helped to spread it to other cultures and black populations. In Mexico and other speaking countries, the wedgie or the calzon chino was also seen more in their culture, as they seen it through wrestling or even in TV. This decade also highlighted what many of the past decades could not, which was that wedgies actually did exist. This decade also reflected the existence of natural wedgies that's also happening. In 1993, according to Snapper, ironically, he notes that boxers are a form of natural wedgie givers over briefs. Interesting. This speaks to the times now where wedgies are reflected in both the natural and the print style. As we stated earlier, choosing your undies was the most important option for not receiving a wedgie during the night. As we close this decade out, the first widely known kink space specifically for wedgies was finally created, known as Girls Getting Wedgies, or another way of knowing it as Lucky Fetish. This website is actually still operating till this day. It was also the first website to only showcase just girls getting wedgies. Also during this year, bullying legislation finally went through as a response to the Columbine, which will later reflect on the attitudes of wedgies as we go into the Y2K and the 2000s era. Welcome to the new millennium of the 2000s. This decade serves as the beginning of what I like to call the Stretch Nation. If you're a millennial or a fellow Gen Z, definitely drop it down in the comment section so I know where you at. This era of time is highly regarded by older community wedgie members as the golden age of wedgies, because it was that. During this period of time, wedgies were more accessible than ever. We had wedgies on almost every single kids network, including non-kids network like MTV. Y'all, like, we had video games that allowed you to give wedgies. We were at a different time. More wedgie literature began to pop up in my classroom, like Captain Underpants and The Wedgie Woman. If you read that book multiple times, definitely drop it down in the comment section, because I know I at least read that probably 3 or 4 times. On Cartoon Network, there were many shows like Ed, Edd n Eddy, Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends, Billy and Mandy, and of course my favorite, Codename Kids Next Door, that showcased not just one wedgie but multiple wedgies throughout the series. I literally remember where I was in the world when I saw the commercial for Codename Kids Next Door, and I remember seeing number 4 getting yo-yoed by his tidy whities, and I literally remember just like running to the room. I was probably like no more than 5 or 6 and trying to find the next time. Though you younger Gen Zers, we didn't have cable where you could like pause it. You had to just catch it on the next commercial if you were so fortunate. But I ended up catching on the next commercial, and I pressed that record on my VCR, and we ended up getting some content. This specific episode gave us a multitude of wedgie techniques, including the ones I have never seen, which is the Reggie wedgie and the Nexus Flexus wedgie. And let me just say, this did not at all like start my fetish. Keep in mind, I was a kid, so I'm not thinking about it from the perspective of like, oh, I like this. But ironically, this episode literally made me want to go try all of these wedgies on my own. So let my story speak to the kind of influence that these types of TV shows and other instances in life prove to you just how much these things can influence our lives. Which also begs me to bring the question, who authorized the episode? Like, who was authorizing all these different like wedgie types, and how did the producer, whoever that wrote the show, knew to write those things? Like, I have so many questions. Are these producers also into wedgie? And if not, did they understand the impact that these shows would eventually bring to a whole generation, let alone a whole community? I don't think about it, most of these shows usually only show white underwear, and I wonder if that's to reflect the times of history, or is it just reflecting something that society should find as a joke if a guy wears tidy whities in real life? On Nickelodeon, you had shows like Fairly Odd Parents, which showcased a female bully. Like, dare I say it, I think Vicky would actually make Mask have a run for his money. Like, I can see him trying to like sneak up behind her and trying to give her an atomic, and I feel like she's gonna pull out some like mega weapon and try to like him. And he's actually gonna get scared. We had SpongeBob SquarePants that showed the first technically sponge wedgie. We had iCarly that popularized the Texas wedgie. And of course, how could we forget the iconic wedgie box? Danny Phantom, which had the first half ghost wedgie. We also got to see the first wedgie genie ever in the episode of Wedgelore with Mr. Meaty. I'm not gonna lie to y'all, that episode has always been weird to me, but maybe that's just me. On Disney, we saw wedgies on both live action as well as cartoons. Shows like Even Steven, Phil of the Future, Lizzie McGuire giving her brother a wedgie. On Sunny with a Chance, we saw also a multitude of wedgies, which included 28 more. This was just the top 3 networks that had the most wedgies. Can you imagine all the other ones that did them every now and then? Like on Fox and MTV and FX. We even got to see it in the NBA. This is even further reflected when we're talking about movies like Scary Movie 2, where we had 3 wedgies in one movie, and then also following the next sequel with a girl on girl. White chicks, Bad Santa. This can also be further seen in video games like The Sims and Bully. As the amount of wedgie media increases, the amount of reach that it can potentially have to awaken people to their wedgie fetish has also increased. Really amazing about this era, especially when it comes to media, is that this is the first time that we have had so much content. Really, there really wasn't a need to make more content. There were so many different TV shows and networks that were hosting wedgies that we didn't need to necessarily get our fix from other people because it was all getting broadcasted on our television or on YouTube or social media websites like Facebook and MySpace. This, in my opinion, was when wedgies actually became a superstar. As the internet boomed and computers began to get better with their processing and access, more people were able to get more computers. This allowed more people within the wedgie community to be able to connect more than ever before. This is what allowed kink spaces like WedgieMen.com, Wedgie Haven, were able to take off as a result of this. Many Gen X and millennials ran to the discussion boards to see who was in their neighborhood. If somebody posted a new wedgie, a new story. This was the first time in history where many people realized that they were not alone with this fetish. Keep in mind that most of these were made between the early and mid 2000s, which meant that a lot of them helped to bring rise to some of our favorite creators that are still here today, like TWC, 01, Latinx, KinkX, Loyal Wedgie. Keep in mind, this is between the early 2000s to about the mid 2000s, which meant that social media was not what it is now. And so many people prefer to use these kink spaces like WedgieMen.com and Wedgie Haven to be able to interact with more people versus using MySpace and Facebook. This was the first time where you've seen more meetups happen now than ever versus just having to buy content from people that you do not know. These kink spaces were also one of the first time that you got to see men and women both coexist in the same environment. This also confirmed that there were actually women who were also into wedgies. This was the first time in history that we've actually been able to fully see the full spectrum of the wedgie community. Similar to the state of the world, the community reflects what the rest of the state is. And according to a 2000 census brief, 75.1% of Americans were white, 12.3% were African American, 3.6% were Asian, 0.9% was American Indian, and 5.5% were other races. This was also reflected within the wedgie community, which means that the community, still to this point, was still a very white male kink space. And with that does come certain attitudes of possibly overt racism, misogyny. Of course, this is not to say that everyone is like this, as I've met amazing people throughout this community. I would be lying to you if I told you that I not specifically went through my own racism. There's more happening than we may think. While I do think that the community at this point was amazing for what it was able to accomplish, there were a lack of conversations being had about how our community can improve. Regardless of what the demographic reflected, what was true during this era was that there were a lot of missteps within the community as well as the internet in general. This was the 2000 era, so at this point, internet is just starting to become more of a thing. There was a lot of lack of regulation. There was a lot of people who were posting a lot of content that probably were not above age. This will of course lead to what will later happen as we get to the 2010s. There was people who were still in content, which honestly till this day, that's still an issue. You had a kink space and more people were able to interact with each other. There was a lack of framework for people to be able to learn how to stop being so ashamed of the fetish. Many people at this point were still very, very ashamed. They didn't want to show their face. They barely wanted to get on the internet and show who they were. They were just terrified. In 2001, we get our first self-wedgie on record. This also further highlights the attitudes towards just tidy wedgie briefs as a whole response to the past decade and the coming. By this point, rarely were self-wedgies ever done. However, we did get it on Even Steven, as well as on Zoolander when Ben Stiller and Owen Wilson both gave themselves melons to rip their briefs off their head. Now, kink spaces weren't the only place that was also bringing in more of the wedgie community. With networks like MySpace, Facebook, my favorite, YouTube, many more people were able to keep in touch, post statuses about their day, and of course, post more wedgie content. YouTube really helped to globalize wedgie culture around the world. This was the first time that I've ever seen not just wedgies in English, but I saw Calzoncino, I saw Hosen here, I've seen Spartaculo, and all of this was available at a touch of a button on your laptop or on your cell phone. Just like the issue in the kink spaces, these spaces also had issues that they showed a lot of underage wedgie content that should not have been posted. This platform gave rise to so many creators, from DCK Ballin 59, Stupid Stuff 74, and of course, yours favorite. As cell phones began to give the people the ability to be able to record videos, more videos in general were able to be posted and also shown across the world, which meant that more wedgies also were seen as a result. This issue was also seen in DeviantArt, as many artists would end up creating much of their favorite creators growing up for many different TV shows. However, so those characters were still at the young age. The last thing that I do want to note about the 2000s is that the creation of wedgie-proof underwear has finally been created. In 2007, a pair of twins created wedgie-proof underwear as a result of them continuing to get in trouble for giving each other wedgie. Did any of you guys get a pair? Because we might have to test this. You know, we must run a couple tests. The 2010s, according to Britney Spears, was when the world ended. No, but seriously, do y'all remember in 2012, allegedly everybody thought that we were all supposed to like off of the face of the earth because of the Mayans? This era marked a continuation of what was happening in the past eras. More creators began to come on the rise, more media was showing wedgies, and social media continues to blow up to astronomical heights, which also helped to push the wedgie community. More TV shows began to use wedgies as a form of slapstick humor. This continues to reflect the ongoing influence that most of these shows had, as more people began to post more of these wedgie clips, specifically from these shows, onto the internet and other places. Makes it great on one hand because you get to have this big archive of all this different like wedgie content over like the decade. But on the other hand, it's continuing to influence a lot of different people within the world. More women start to get more wedgies just as hard as the men. This wasn't just seen in the mainstream world with syndicated television and movies and games. This was also seen on the social media side. While Tumblr was founded in 2007, the community really began to take off during the 2010s as they was able to use apps like Tumblr to post their content in whatever way that they choose to, whether it's explicit or clean, to a wide range of audiences, which will change as we get later into the decade. By 2013, Instagram debuted in what better way for wedgie accounts to show off their content? Given that most of us are doing wedgies, and wedgies are usually involving like a visual effect, you start to see much of the community start to utilize Instagram as a means to not only post their content, but be able to communicate with other people and even set up meetups. This didn't just allow the advancement of just wedgie content creators, but it also allowed the advancement of repost pages, wedgie artists who want to push some of their content outside of DeviantArt, and also lurker accounts. These social media apps also help to bridge the gap with the community members, as more people were most likely using Instagram and other social medias versus using our kink spaces like Wedgie Haven. Now, it was a bit harder to connect with people that you may have wanted to meet up with on Instagram versus Wedgie Haven. It did allow more people to be able to connect overall. This also allowed many different wedgie accounts to just go from just being individuals on the internet to straight up influencers. Back in the 2000s, when people would post on like Wedgie Haven and Wedgie Men and other places, most of these people didn't know who these pictures were from. And so a lot of people were seeing content that they had no idea who it was from. Compared to this decade, where now you know exactly who you're talking to, this was the result in the advancement of technology, and more importantly, smartphones. By the mid-2010s, most people either had an Android or an iPhone. And most of them gave the ability to be able to take pictures and go on the internet, and also use apps like Instagram and Twitter and Tumblr. So smartphones also had a really big hand into why community members are able to interact with each other and bridge that gap. When most of us think of who likes wedgies and where would they be in the world, most people usually think that they're probably in the US of A. But there's also plenty of wedgie lovers in Brazil, in Mexico, Italy, and other places in the world. So if anything, social media showed that there was a really big world out there that we're not seeing on a regular basis, especially when it comes to wedgie. Now, you'll also hear me say that this era was not perfect within its accomplishment. The use of social media and the influencer era becoming more of a thing also played a role into people having parasocial relationships, as well as communication issues when they reach out to other people. This is when you start to see more people publicly state that they would never come back to the community again. Creators Shabbat Pranks is one of the biggest content creators during the 2010s that everybody should know who they are, and if you don't, they made a lot of amazing content during this time, but they were also met with a lot of harassing and people literally finding their personal accounts, following them on there, and following people that they know in their personal life. Really got out of hand to the point where they said that they were not only leaving, but they would ask people to please not post their content, as they just want to leave that side of time alone. Of course, unfortunately, on the internet, once you post something, that there's no way that you can control how it goes. And so unfortunately, a lot of people still do have these in their Google Drive folders, as well as selling them and reposting them until this very day. And this just reflects the lack of regulation and attitudes of content creators within the wedgie community. This would again affect a lot of the stress that many creators have ended up going through during this time. As the attitudes of bullying nerd culture changed, this also reflected in many people not posting as many wedgie videos as they once did in the 2000s. In 2014, a report came out about the school to prison pipeline and viewed wedgies as a part of seeing students more likely to go into jail after they graduate or if they go straight to college. Another issue that social media highlighted on was the effects of racism. There were some accounts that just straight up didn't post anybody that weren't skinny, white, and low-key a twink. And while this may be one account, this also reflects a lot of people who may follow these accounts. You have a lot of content creators who don't get a lot of their props because of the fact of racism. Now, on a lighter note, YouTube did have a lot more content to be able to be seen from both the 2000s and the 2010s by this point, including more wedgie pranks, as in the 2010s, we all know that that was the prank era of YouTube where every relationship was doing pranks. And even some creators who were desperate enough to get more subscribers would actually do more wedgie challenges that were prescribed by wedgie people. I remember seeing the comments where people would be like, oh, could you do this atomic in the next video? And then within a week or so, they would have another video of them doing atomic. And mind you, these were people who were not in the wedgie community. So this is very, very big, because this is the first time where you actually have seen the community interact with non-wedgie people, which will be problematic in the future. And during this time, I think that this was more specific to YouTube, because I've rarely ever seen people comment under like Facebook or Twitter posts or even Instagram posts. So if you want to learn more about some of your favorite creators and the lifestyle that we lived over the years, definitely check out the Wedgie Lifestyle video when it drops. In 2013, a crazy MTV show known as Jackass sparked the conversation about the fall of wedgie culture in the media. As a result, this show started to not only do more wedgies on the show, but also outside of the show at radio shows and other places. While there were a lot of TV shows that were still utilizing wedgies, most of these wedgies were probably being done on kid-friendly or teen-friendly young adult audiences. During this decade, however, we did find out how dangerous wedgies can get. The headline was sensational. A Marine veteran was sentenced to 30 years for stepfather with an atomic wedgie. What more fanfare do you need, even from just people who weren't even into wedgie? Many people made jokes on the internet like, how could someone be unalived from getting an atomic? And I didn't know they were that dangerous. Even during a very sensitive subject like that, people did not take this seriously. As a matter of fact, people continue to think it was a joke. To my knowledge, this was the first time on record that we have seen somebody actually be unalived from a wedgie themselves. However, I will go more deeper into this on our episode of Wedgie True Crime. In 2016, according to Vickers, the author and also known as Elvis the Pelvis, that name alone, you deserve to get all the time, so I'm just gonna be honest with you, gets bullied in college literally for the underwear that he wore. This was of course also due to he was a band geek and also happens to just wear tighty-whitey. But this continues to of course assert the notion that people who were considered dorks and geeks were still getting wedgie, that just wasn't on a global level compared to the past years. Now, as we do get closer into 2017 and 18, we do start to see the shift in social media. Future internet regulations that have happened led to many of these websites like Wedgie Haven and Wedgie Men ended up being taken down as a result. Wedgie Haven did, however, hold on until about 2017, 2018, when it finally posted on Tumblr that it was officially closing its account and its websites. However, they were passing the torch on to the next wedgie generation. The closing of Wedgie Haven did a number on the community. This is crazy because it has such an effect on the loss of the community and content, and it's part of the reason why we rely on social media so much heavily. Speaking of Tumblr, this era also reflected the changes in social media, as social media platforms like Tumblr and YouTube also started to change their platforms, where they started to cut a lot of the content out. Tumblr focusing on adult content and YouTube focusing on inappropriate. Tumblr's huge purge did not only just lead to them losing a lot of their account users, but it also led to a lot of content being lost, because a lot of them ended up getting deleted, purged off of the page, which means much of us will not be able to see a lot of the content that was there since the early 2010s. While we would not see the effects of this until later, adult platforms, clips for sale became to get its rise within the 2010s, which we will further see as we get into the 2020s. But these adult sites like Clip for Sales and Man of Films and Ganaries, helped to also usher in the new era, which is more wedgie people starting to charge for their services. There was surprisingly a lot of content on Clips for Sale. Like, it was honestly like looking at a buffet. You could see anything that you wanted, whether it was male on women, women on male, male on male, female on female, whatever that you like. This was also integral to the community, because unlike a lot of community members during the 2010s, many people were not showing their face and even wanted to like get into character on camera without them being scared of people knowing who they are in real life. These adult creators had no problem playing the role of the nerd, playing the role of the dork, fully giving the audience what they want to see so bad. It was a chef's kiss time, and honestly, you just had to be there. During this present decade of the 2020s, wedgie content and the community are more accessible now than ever. Plethora of huge underwear choices known to man, seen atomics being done by their boxers and boxer briefs. More briefs can stretch to atomics without having to actually go to like a 5XL. This decade is also responsible for accomplishing more unimaginable wedgie techniques that we thought would never be possible. Things like the flagpole wedgie. More public wedgies have happened now than ever before. This, in my opinion, is the fantasy wedgie area, as many people were now able to finally do wedgies that they have seen as kids that they thought were never possible, and now they're able to finally do. Starting at the start of the decade in 2020, when the pandemic forced the world into isolation, wedgie beat-ups were halted, underwear became harder to get as many companies as a result ended up becoming defunct or closed business, and to some degree, wedgie content did suffer during this time. Many creators being stuck in their house with nothing else to do started to post more, which actually inspired more people to actually get on social medias and also use adult sites in order to sell some of their content. This decade is when we finally see the actual wedgie career become a thing. Many people like myself ended up doing wedgies to the point where they actually started to make enough money to supplement their income. This of course would inspire other people to start making their own careers that would end up coming in as we continue through the 2020s. Having these careers though did not make everything perfect. As you know, when you're dealing with people, many people will send you DMs that may be odd requests that you're not really interested in doing, or sometimes you have to feel the need where you have to keep up your content going, or you may lose your fan base as a result. Again, this was not just reflected in the United States, but this is reflected in the world. So for the individual themselves that's making the money off of this, obviously this is a great thing. This did not come without some flack from the community. Some community members will scream and holler about, oh, I wish my content used to be free. And when was it? I missed the days when people didn't expect to get paid for making their content. While I am biased, I also do think that if people are making great content and they're spending time making sure that their quality is good and they feel like they should deserve to get paid for their services, why shouldn't they? Listen, let me be the person to tell you, if you feel like it's time for you to make an account and get paid, make an account and get paid. Social media continues to be the reigning champ of what people spend most of their days doing, and so a lot of people in the wedgie community front are also on social media. From a non-community perspective, wedgies are still seen as like a joke for many people on social media as they use it towards political figures and other big celebrities that they want to get their kicks at. More creators are posting wedgies and making accounts each day. More people are also showing face and showing their most embarrassing wedgie, which is very different compared to the past decades. This both reflects the attitudes of people on social media as well as the attitudes towards the wedgie themselves. During this era, based on a lot of research, a lot of people have shown that they are a little bit more lax on people knowing that they like this. They're more comfortable showing that they like this on the internet. This era is also very key because a lot more people are starting to have more conversations, and more importantly, deeper conversations that are not just wedgie related. Content can practically get found on damn near every single platform, from X, Instagram, Reddit, Blue Sky, even ChatGPT. This does, however, reflect the changes in community, as we do not have many kink spaces in order for us to be able to actively communicate in different ways outside of the social media lenses, which reflects the community as being more individualistic. Now, it is not to say that we do not have these smaller spaces of community. We have places like YNK and other small friendship groups within the social media internet that people do have these small spaces of community that they're able to effectively communicate, enhance their lifestyles, both in a wedgie and a non-wedgie perspective. But on a larger scale, we're very, very fragmented, and this is due to us being on so many different islands. Some people are on Reddit, some people are on X, some people are on Instagram, some people are on Tumblr. And so it's hard to get the information out to everybody when everybody's all on different islands compared to in the past, most people were using Wedgie Haven. Now, while the community does still have its issues, we did have some good moments that happened during these decades. In about 2020, 2021, Benjamin Frederickson began to highlight the wedgie community on a more sophisticated level, both using both community members as well as models to be able to market to a bigger demographic on what wedgie culture looks like. There's where you'll see some of the most polished wedgie photos that you will ever see. Some I think are actually in a museum somewhere in New York or LA. What I also loved about this too was that he was very, very community focused. During this time, he ended up getting a spot on Men's Health magazine, which is a national magazine that's read by all men and other people who use it for educational purposes. And there was a part in there about the wedgie fetish, and he asked a few content creators by myself, Golf Bully, and a few others to discuss what does wedgies mean to us and why do we have this fetish. This was all done during 2021. This was like the first ever public magazine that we have been posted into. This alone not only just helped to advance the community, but it also helped to advance the inclusivity space of the community. In 2023, one of our beloved creators, Clavis Spectre, actually had like this little swinging, hanging wedgie, and ironically, SZA ended up posting it. Yes, that's SZA. This doesn't just reflect, of course, like wedgie culture in a general sense, but it also reflects the fact that the community is starting to get seen, more than ever, and this was thanks to social media as well as other forms of interaction. New things were happening within the community. More public wedgie events like Nerds vs. Bullies in Chicago, a Stretchy Hour that's mainly in the DC, Maryland, Virginia area. These events, as well as other smaller parties that people may have done, have also helped to create not only just a community sense, but also create more fantasy. Nerds vs. Bullies was the first time I've ever seen somebody get like an actual wedgie, and I also was able to be a part of. There was like probably 7 or 8 of us that was like dangling this guy in the air, and if you remember those old videos on YouTube, that's pretty much how it looked. We were out there living our fantasies a little bit, because most of us have never done that before. I think these events also served as a purpose for people to realize that they do want deeper relationships. The success of these events also reflects that people want to get more wedgies instead of just doing the self wedgies that they do in their home. While TV shows don't really show it as much as they did in the past decades, non-community members definitely have. More TikTok wedgies are being seen more now than ever. As more people yearn for internet fame and money, more wedgies are being given as a result. This decade did bring a lot more representation, as a lot more content creators that were of color were starting to get more push and more success. In 2022, I felt that there was a need to create more of a Black and brown safe space for other content creators that wanted to get away from the internet and just also get to know each other without the feeling of, dang, the only time you want to talk to me is when you want to see me in a wedgie. And this is what birthed a Black and brown Discord chat known as the Wedgie Matrix. This will eventually become the breeding ground that we create in 2023, Upsilon Nu Kappa fraternity. In 2023, the first ever wedgie fraternity known as YNK or Upsilon Nu Kappa, as well as the Wedgie Club, as a forum to create education, to advance the community's efforts, and to also build brotherhood and community around men. And the Wedgie Club, as you can see what we're doing right now, we're here to basically help to push that education as well as to build community. And as of this year in 2025, as the recording of this video, wedgies have officially been banned from the WWE on the women's side. Whew, that was a lot of information. Now you see why we have to break down the deeper discussions on other parts. I hope that you all enjoyed this video. I hope that we taught you something. I hope you learned something new. I hope you found something interesting about history. If you don't take anything else away from this video, please take away that our culture runs deep, not just in America, but in the world surrounding. If you enjoyed today's video, you'll definitely enjoy the next one, which is on wedgies and underwear. But before you go, tell me what era was your favorite era of the wedgie history. Mine, of course, has to be the big 2000s. I mean, that was just Gen Z city, you know, what can you do? That was the time when the best generation since sliced bread was created, so what can I say? Also, have you ever wondered if like these TV and movie executives that are like putting these things in the script also may have a wedgie fetish? Drop that down in the comment section. If you'd like to see any of my show notes, I'll definitely be posting this on Patreon. Thank you so much for supporting the content. I can't wait to continue this series with you all. Please stay wedgie as always, and I will see you all in the next video. Jahk out.